For centuries, the Ottoman Empire stood as a colossus, a beacon of power, wealth, and profound influence. But within its gilded palaces and bustling cities, behind veiled windows and imposing walls, lay a world shrouded in mystery, fantasy, and unsettling realities. We speak of the Ottomans' most intimate secrets, practices so deeply intertwined with power, tradition, and desperate survival that they often challenge our modern understanding. From the gilded cages of the harem to the shadowed corners of imperial life, untold stories of desire, control, and brutal social consequence lay buried. Tonight, we dare to pull back the curtain on the true sexual practices of the Ottoman Empire. What was truly permitted? What was truly forbidden? And what horrifying realities did power hide? Delving into the nuances of Ottoman sexuality reveals aspects that profoundly challenge modern, Western-centric understandings of identity. Concepts like gay or lesbian simply did not exist in the same way. Instead, sexual desire and relationships were often understood through dynamics of age, social status, and roles, rather than fixed orientations. And in this complex framework, same-sex desire, particularly among men, found remarkably open expression in certain cultural spheres. Ottoman classical poetry, a cornerstone of high culture, is replete with verses celebrating the beauty of young, beardless men, often referred to as olan or other endearing terms. Poets, both famous and obscure, engaged in elaborate literary debates on the virtues of loving young men versus women. This wasn't merely abstract art, it reflected a societal phenomenon where attraction to and relationships with these young men were a recognized, if not always universally accepted, part of life. These relationships were often age-structured, with older men admiring and sometimes engaging with younger, pre-pubescent or adolescent males. This phenomenon was documented by Ottoman chroniclers and even noted, with varying degrees of judgment, by European travelers. Social spaces played a key role in facilitating these interactions. Public baths, or hammams, known for their communal nudity, were sometimes associated with same-sex encounters for both men and women, becoming spaces where discreet liaisons could occur away from the strictures of everyday life. Coffee houses and dervish lodges also served as venues where men could socialize and form bonds that sometimes extended into romantic or sexual relationships. While Islamic law contained prohibitions against certain same-sex acts, the enforcement of these laws was often inconsistent, varying widely depending on the era, the ruler, and the public nature of the act. Private consensual relationships were often overlooked. However, this period of relative openness in literature and certain social circles began to shift dramatically in the 19th century. As the Ottoman Empire engaged more deeply with Western European thought and legal systems, there was a gradual but significant move towards a more rigid, heteronormative understanding of sexuality. The decriminalization of sodomy in the 1858 Ottoman Penal Code, often cited as a liberalizing move, paradoxically coincided with a rise in social stigma and a more generalized disapproval of same-sex relations, influenced by Victorian European sensibilities. This marked a profound cultural transformation, pushing practices that were once openly discussed in poetry into the shadows, and ultimately suppressing a vibrant aspect of Ottoman history. When the word harem is uttered, it conjures images of exotic dancers, boundless indulgence, and a sultan's personal playground. But the reality of the Ottoman imperial harem was a stark, complex institution, far removed from Western fantasies. At its core, the harem was not merely a pleasure palace. It was the engine room of the dynasty, meticulously designed to ensure the continuation of the Ottoman line and to consolidate imperial power. Every woman within its walls, from the lowliest servant to the most favored concubine, served a purpose within this intricate system. The women of the harem were often slaves, acquired through conquest, tribute, or purchase from various regions across the empire and beyond. They entered the palace as young girls, where they received an education tailored to their potential roles, some trained in music, dance, languages, or needlework. others destined for more mundane domestic duties. This rigorous training was not just about pleasure, it was about cultivating refined companions and ensuring a disciplined, loyal workforce for the dynasty. At the very top of this rigidly structured world was the Valide Sultan, the reigning sultan's mother. She was arguably the most powerful woman in the empire, holding immense influence over her son and often involved in critical state decisions. Below her, the hierarchy descended through the sultan's consorts, beginning with those who bore him sons, holding titles like Haseki Sultan. These women wielded significant power and influence, often becoming key political players through their sons. However, the vast majority of the thousands of women living in the harem never had sexual contact with the sultan. Their lives were dedicated to service, and many would eventually be married off to high-ranking officials and nobles, extending the sultan's network of loyalty throughout the empire. The eunuchs were another essential and often terrifying component of the harem. These castrated males brought from outside the empire served as guards, administrators, and the only men, aside from the sultan and his young sons, permitted within the female quarters. Their castration was seen as guaranteeing their loyalty and ensuring the purity of the sultan's lineage. The Kızlar Asa, the chief black eunuch, was a powerful figure, controlling access to the harem and serving as a crucial intermediary between the women and the outside world. He often amassed great wealth and political power, making him a central player in palace intrigues. The harem was a world of intense competition where women vied for the sultan's attention, not merely for pleasure, but for the immense power and security that came with producing an heir. The pressures were immense, and the stakes, both for individual women and for the future of the empire, were brutally high. Beyond the confines of traditional marriage, the institution of concubinage was a legally sanctioned and deeply embedded practice within the Ottoman Empire, shaping the social fabric from the imperial palace to wealthy households. Concubines were typically women of slave status, acquired through various means, including conquest, tribute, purchase from slave markets, or even as gifts. Their journey into Ottoman society often began with a forced departure from their homelands, bringing them into a system that, while stripping them of their original freedom, paradoxically offered some avenues for social mobility and power. Upon entering service, particularly within the imperial palace, these women underwent extensive training. They were educated in Turkish language, Islamic customs, music, dance, and various domestic arts. This meticulous preparation transformed them into valuable assets, whether as skilled performers, trusted servants, or potential companions for the sultan. For a concubine, bearing a child, especially a son, was the ultimate path to security and influence. A concubine who gave birth to the sultan's child could not be sold and was automatically elevated in status, often becoming a favored consort and, if her son ascended to the throne, even the powerful Valide Sultan. This system was strategically important for the dynasty, as it allowed sultans to produce heirs from women who had no pre-existing powerful family ties, thus preventing potential rivalries or external influences from established noble houses. The legal framework surrounding concubinage under Islamic law, Sharia, distinguished it from outright sexual slavery, offering certain protections. While a concubine did not have the same rights as a legal wife, if she bore her master a child, she would generally become an walad, mother of a child, meaning she could not be sold and would be freed upon her master's death. Her children were considered legitimate and had the same inheritance rights as those born to a free wife, provided they were acknowledged by the father. This provided a degree of legal security and a pathway to freedom for concubines and their offspring. However, it's crucial to acknowledge the inherent power imbalance. These women were still considered property, their lives dictated by their masters. The psychological toll of forced servitude, displacement, and the competitive environment, especially within the imperial harem, where every woman was vying for the attention of one man, would have been immense. Despite the potential for upward mobility, the foundation of concubinage rested on a system that denied fundamental freedoms, highlighting a dark and often overlooked aspect of Ottoman social structure. At the heart of Ottoman society Beneath the grandeur of the state and the complexities of the palace lay the traditional family unit, cemented by marriage. This institution was far more than a personal bond. It was a cornerstone of social order, designed to ensure lineage, maintain honor, and stabilize communities. While romantic love certainly existed, most marriages, particularly among the elite, were arranged for strategic purposes, to forge political alliances, consolidate wealth, or cement social standing. Parents held significant authority in selecting spouses for their children, prioritizing family reputation and societal expectations over individual romantic inclinations. According to Islamic law, men were permitted to have up to 4 wives, provided they could treat them all equally, a principle that was often challenging to uphold in practice, and thus made polygamy less common among the general population. Divorce was permissible, though often more accessible to men. Women, while having fewer direct legal rights in public life compared to men, possessed certain protections within marriage under Islamic law, including rights to dower, mahar, and maintenance. However, the control of female sexuality was a pervasive aspect of Ottoman social life. A woman's honor was inextricably linked to the honor of her family, making premarital or extramarital sexual activity a grave transgression. This emphasis manifested in various social customs, including practices of seclusion and veiling, which limited women's public visibility and interactions with men outside their immediate family circle. These customs varied widely across different regions and social classes, with urban elite women often having more restrictions than their rural counterparts. The consequences of sexual transgression for women could be severe. Adultery, known as zina, was theoretically punishable by stoning or flogging under Islamic law. While the strict evidentiary requirements for such punishments made them exceedingly rare in practice, the social stigma and ostracization associated with even the accusation of zina were devastating. Some historical accounts also describe cases of public humiliation, such as parading women through the streets in prostitutes' attire, or even forced prostitution, particularly during times when officials were determined to enforce public morality. These punishments, while not universally applied, underscore the intense societal pressure on women to maintain strict sexual propriety and the severe repercussions for those who deviated from the established norms. The control of female bodies and sexuality was seen as essential for upholding family honor and the broader social order. Despite the clear prohibitions against extramarital sexual relations in Islamic law, prostitution was an undeniable and at times openly regulated reality within the Ottoman Empire. This stark contradiction highlights the pragmatic nature of Ottoman governance, which often balanced religious ideals with the economic and social realities of a vast and diverse empire. Rather than attempting to eradicate prostitution entirely, which was likely seen as an impossible task, the Ottoman state often opted for a system of toleration and taxation. Historical records indicate that specific districts or areas within cities were unofficially, or even semi-officially, designated for prostitution. Authorities would often license brothels and individual sex workers, collecting taxes from them, effectively integrating them into the urban economy as a source of revenue. This approach allowed the state to control the practice, manage potential public health concerns, though rudimentary by modern standards, and derive financial benefit from an activity that was religiously condemned but socially persistent. The reasons individuals, particularly women, engage in prostitution were often rooted in economic necessity. Divorce, widowhood, or sudden poverty could leave women without a support system, pushing them towards such livelihoods. For many, it was a desperate measure for survival in a society with limited opportunities for independent women. While the state might regulate it, engaging in prostitution carried significant social stigma. Sex workers were marginalized, often banished from their neighborhoods, or during periods of stricter moral enforcement, subjected to public humiliation. This could include being paraded through the streets or briefly imprisoned, especially during holy months like Ramadan, when moral standards were expected to be rigorously upheld. There were instances where particularly stringent local officials or sultans would enforce harsher measures, leading to more severe punishments than mere banishment. These moments of strict enforcement, however, were often temporary and localized, contrasting with the more widespread, tacit tolerance. The existence and semi-regulation of prostitution reveal a complex facet of Ottoman society, a system where official religious law stood in tension with practical governance, economic forces, and enduring human behaviors, creating a nuanced reality that defied simple moral categorization. It was a dark, yet undeniable part of the imperial landscape. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. We know these are not easy stories to hear, and we deeply appreciate you joining us on this exploration of history's darker corners. If you found this video insightful, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with others who are interested in untold history, and subscribing to the channel to make sure you don't miss our next chapter. Thank you, and see you in the next episode of Dark Lore.